Hi, everyone. We're
Dan,
back again.
Dan and Nancy Leffler here with Being with Grief, and we're here to talk about this month's topic, which is changing the conversation and having difficult conversations.
Yes. And for those of you who are joining us live, if you have any questions as we're going along, we encourage you to put them in the chat. We keep this informal, so if you want to raise your hand and ask them on camera, we're happy to do that. And we will have an opportunity for questions after we finish our conversation.
We also will keep ourselves pinned, and if you would like to keep your video on or off, that's perfectly fine. We're here to make this easy on everyone because
Right.
conversations are difficult
Right. And if you're watching this on a replay, we welcome you there. And if you have any questions that come up as you're watching, listening to our conversation, you can put them in the comments of whatever format you're watching this on, and feel free to contact us directly, and we'll tell you how to do that a little bit later. But let's start our conversation.
Exactly. The whole idea is that there are difficult conversations that need to happen that we sometimes are reluctant to do. And what we would like to do today is to talk about what to say to those who are grieving, what to say when someone asks the question, well, what happened? And then we'll talk about how you can introduce someone to us.
And like usually happens when we're having these conversations, there may be one or two other times when difficult conversations are important to have. So when those arise organically in the present moment, as they tend to do when we're having these conversations in our webinar, we will answer those as well.
So what do you do when you have to ask a big, hard question that on an important topic? For us, it's the topic around grief and death, which always seems to be one of the things that people find most difficult to address.
Right. And you'll hear people saying things like that someone passed away, or they'll use language that is hoping to make things a little bit easier or one step removed. And I recognize that at some point along my grief journey. And so I'm very cognizant of the language that I use. I didn't lose my daughter in the mall like I did when she was 2, but my daughter died. Our daughter died. Leah died. And learning how to be, I mean, it's still not comfortable saying it, let's be honest, but learning how to include the honest talk in our conversations is important for me.
Yeah, exactly. And those moments, while they may be uncomfortable, we need to find a way to be inclusive, to include the people that are in our lives that we find difficult moments to share, to make it more easy to have these things, and to give ourselves permission to call to mind our loved ones who are no longer with us.
So let's take a minute to define what makes conversation difficult. We've talked about some of the topics that we find, but what makes a conversation difficult to have? What makes it a difficult conversation? And one of those things is difficult conversations make us feel vulnerable. We don't like to feel vulnerable. Being vulnerable makes us feel uncomfortable. And when we're vulnerable, people may see a side of us that we don't want them to see.
For a guy, and I'll talk from my perspective, being vulnerable is opening yourself up and showing that there may be weakness. And it's really not a weakness to be vulnerable. If you think about it, it is showing courage and strength in a way that may not be comfortable for others. And while we don't like to feel comfortable when we bring up some of these topics, we know that we are making others uncomfortable.
Right. And vulnerability also puts us in touch with our humanness, and we're all human. So let's allow each other to see our humanness. And it's in that humanness that we create those connections that are important for our growth, for our relationships, and for building the lives that we want to build with our loved ones.
Making it deeper and more meaningful as
Right.
as you go.
Right. And that brings to mind some of the important conversations that we need to have. We're not aware of them until someone in our lives that we love dies, and we realize, wow, I don't want to not say the things that I need to say to my son or my daughter-in-law or my grandchildren or my husband. I don't want to die and have some things be unsaid. And so those two can be uncomfortable because we're faced with our own mortality. And we want them to know all the things that we want them to know, while we can still share it with love and with joy and face to face.
And that takes compassion. And in our work with estate planners and
elder care attorneys,
yes, and end of life doulas, those same emotional, impactful statements can cause you to feel stress and panic. Right. And one of the things that we'd like to talk about is how can we make those more comfortable and take some of that feeling of being overwhelmed away from it.
Right, because feelings may come up that you're not used to feeling, or that you push down because they do make you feel uncomfortable, and you think if you don't face them, they'll go away. And if you've been listening to us for any length of time, you've heard each of us talk about the fact that those difficult feelings don't go away. They get louder and louder and louder until they erupt. Like you like to say, we're not pressure cookers. And that's what happens when we don't meet our emotions or allow them to be there as they are. Another thing that could happen when you're having difficult conversations is that you could be triggered. Now, what does being triggered mean? We hear that a lot. To me, being triggered is when a conversation or a situation reminds me of a core wound I have, or a childhood wound that I have that's not completely healed. And so, say, for instance, if I'm triggered back to a time when I was 8 years old, I may be reacting as an 8-year-old rather than responding as a age that I am now, the wise elder that I am today. So if I'm responding as an 8-year-old, and say Dan's responding as a 12-year-old, what do you think is going to happen if this 8-year-old and 12-year-old have this conversation? And then everybody in your family may be triggered in a different way. So you have a group of triggered people having conversations from their childhood wounds. And that's why some of these things escalate so much. And that's another reason why they can feel overwhelming and stressful, and that we panic and want to run away.
Yeah. And anytime you evoke strong feelings, it'll be charged with emotions, and allowing a conversation to evolve, even when it becomes difficult, is a key skill that we talk about and want to focus on here.
Just like grieving involves learning skills to meet that grief, having difficult conversations is also a skill. It's not something that we're taught in school. It's not something that most of us were taught in our families of origin. Some people have been taught that, and we are having conversations with our son and his family now that are impactful and important. And it's just opening up an amazing space for us to enjoy each other's company, to enjoy our granddaughter Aria, and to be a part of their community in a way that we never could have imagined, especially if we hadn't moved here to be with them.
Yeah, and it's all about the kind of outcome you hope for. Changing the conversation is about promoting a healthy relationship and something that allows you, as Nancy says many times, to have the impactful, meaningful life that you would always hoped for.
Right.
So how do we prepare for complex and difficult conversations?
Yeah. How do we learn those skills? Well, one thing that's helped me tremendously is, and we bring this up because we talk often about having the resources in our lives now that will help us to grieve better when we meet grief. So establishing or having these skills to have these conversations before we need them is important, because if you don't know the language of a country that you're going to, and you're expected to be in that culture and earn a living or eat food, and nobody speaks English, how are you going to do that? You'll find a way. It won't be as easy as if you prepared by learning a little bit of the language before you go. So what are some of the ways that we can share that can help our listeners?
Yeah, and I like the way you depicted it. You know, it's rather being proactive in our roles as opposed to reactive. Because when you're faced with a difficult situation, whether it be a death or a divorce or a loss of a job or
health issues,
health issues, there are some tools that we can help you with. One of them that we found very helpful is having a journal and writing about the things that you wish were better in your life. And
just a daily writing practice is really important to me, because when I'm writing, I can touch a place in myself that I can't, even if I'm in deep meditation. So what I usually do is I will meditate or sit in samyama first and then write from there. Not all the time. Sometimes writing itself, I usually get these great ideas at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And so sometimes I'll just get up and write down a word or two, because if I don't, I won't capture it. And then I write about it in the morning. But a daily writing practice is really important to me. So how does your writing help you to be prepared for difficult conversations?
Well, I like, and I think I've always have used the idea of having an outline on the things that are important to me that I want to get across. And, sometimes it's just a bullet point of things that I want to say. Other times I find it helpful to, expand on that. And that's where the daily writing has helped me.
Right.
Because that inspiration, when it comes, is a gift. And, I know you talk many times about the gifts of grief and the things that have led from the insights, I guess, that lead from
right
having grief. And another way that is helpful and that we use sometimes is role playing.
We used to use this a lot with our kids when we were growing up and having family meetings, and we would role play difficult situations. And it's the same concept, but in this case, it would be role playing about a specific difficult conversation that you might want to start, or a situation that you're in about grief or death.
And remember, in role play, it's more than just the words that you say. It is your physical presence, and here are some tips that we can give you that will help you to work your way through this if you've never done it before.
Yeah, and by practicing it doing role playing, you may think, well, that's the real situation isn't here, so I don't feel quite the same way. However, just like when you use a muscle, it becomes stronger. If you have some of these conversations when you're not in the emotionally charged situation, your body is going to remember how to relax. The words are going to come easier because you have exercised that muscle, so to speak.
So let's take the example of you are approaching someone who is at a memorial service, and you're wondering what you can say. And we always like to say that it's a good idea to ask permission by just using a simple starter question, like, I'd like to see how you're doing after your loss, and do you have a moment to talk? And that opens the door and kind of asks permission and gives the griever a starting point. And if they're ready to speak, they'll give you permission.
Right. And if they don't say anything, you can say something like, I know there are no words to describe what you're feeling. I will be here with you. I will sit here with you and be here with you in your pain. You don't have to say anything.
Right. And it's important, to keep whatever these opening remarks are short, because you want to give the griever a chance to talk and tell you what they need.
Right. And learn to be comfortable with silence. We like to fill all the silent spaces up with conversation or with words, because I speak for myself, didn't grow up being comfortable with silence. So learn how to be comfortable with silence, because it's in the silence that when we slow our demeanor down, when we slow our conversation down and provide space for silence, that's when the feelings are allowed to arise.
And you're giving the griever permission to speak. And at that point, your role is really to listen and to kind of check in to where that person is.
Another thing is, we always like to do things for someone who has experienced the death of a loved one. And rather than say something like, what can I do for you? Say something like, I want to bring you a meal. Is tomorrow or the day after good for you? Give them a choice, because in the early weeks after the death of a loved one, I lost all ability to make those kinds of decisions. So be very specific about what you're asking for. Say something like, I'm going to the grocery store. I will pick up groceries for you. And if I hear that now, I might think, oh, I don't want anyone to pick up groceries for me. However, when you're in that moment, I was so grateful for groceries being picked up and leaves being raked and all the things that people did to take care of us. So rather than saying, what do you need? Because we don't know what we need.
Mhm.
They don't know what they need. Give them one or two specific things. And if they don't say anything, say, okay, I'm going to check in with you tomorrow and see what you'll need tomorrow, because each day is a little bit different.
Another tool that you can add is what we like to call the 3 F's. Starting with a fact, including a feeling, and then having a finish. Here's an example. I know that your loved one recently died in the hospital, and I just feel terrible about that, and I'm devastated. And I was hoping that I can help you with some of the feelings that you may be having. The fact, I just recently heard that your father died in the hospital. The feeling is I feel devastated, and the finish is, what can I do to help you? And as Nancy said, being specific and asking, is it okay to come back and check in tomorrow, or you know,
Can I call you on Thursday?
right?
Can I pick you up some groceries when I go to the grocery store? Can I start a meal train for you? Those are all things that are very helpful at a time, especially in early grief.
Another thing to be aware of is, what is your body language telling? And that's another reason that role play can help. If you are relaxed and you're not showing stress or tension in your body, then you're going to put the person that you're speaking to in a more relaxed state. But if I come in and, I just want to know what I can do to help you, you may be putting an undue level of stress on the person,
So-
because they don't
yeah,
know
so
what they
I was
really
just
need.
gonna say, breathing is important to help relax you.
Yeah. So, what
The other
other
thing
thing?
is, don't be afraid to mention their loved one's name.
Mm.
So many people said to us, we didn't want to mention Leah's name to you because we didn't want to remind you of her. And we really appreciated that sentiment because it was coming from a place of love. And her death was at that time, and we still never forget. At that time, it was such a pervasive part of your life, and talking about her actually helped us. And I've talked to so many of my clients who resonate with that and want to speak about their loved ones. So if you're concerned that they're not going to be amenable to that, you can say, is it okay if I share a memory of your loved one with you? And of course, I wanted to hear as much as I could about Leah. And I learned so many things from her friends that I didn't know about her when they were courageous enough to have those conversations with us.
Yeah, exactly. And as an example, when we were doing our series on when we were still in Raleigh, and we would ask people to share the name of their loved one.
Mhm.
That opened the door to a lot of emotion that again gave permission, because we
Broke
were
down the barriers.
right. We
Yeah.
were connecting on and calling that person to be present.
Yeah.
So other things that are helpful that we do is to sometimes light a candle.
Mhm.
Put on music that you enjoy, set that tone, and create the kind of space that you want to have this conversation in.
Right. Holding space for someone who is grieving is sacred work. And it's always different.
There are also things that shouldn't be said.
Yeah, this is a question that we're asked all the time.
And
I like to say anything that starts with at least
That was,
is a good, if you hear yourself saying at least, like at least you have other children, or at least they're in a better place now, or
they're not in pain.
at least they're not in pain. And while all of those things have a kernel of truth to them, they're not helpful to especially an early griever, because yes, we had another child, and that doesn't we still to this day miss Leah tremendously, and often think about what she would be like at age 39 and being Auntie Leah to Arya. So and those things are said again with the best of intentions. Be mindful of how they may come across to someone who is missing their loved one.
Another question that came up when we were preparing for this was, what do you say to someone who has approached you with the question, well, what happened? And
Right.
That is a loaded question, because it really depends on
Well,
how the question was asked and where and when.
this is the specific instance was if you are the one sharing news about someone else dying, a friend dying, or a business associate dying, or someone that you know from church dying, or someone in the neighborhood, and people come to you and say, what happened? Tell us more. Tell us. And that can feel invasive to the person who just shared this really vulnerable piece of information. So, and I guess it also depends on where it's being asked. If it's being asked on social media, my rule of thumb is I don't say anything on social media. I would never ask that question, because it's not up to me to answer it. It's the family of the person who died. That's their story to tell.
Right.
And so that's one thing. Even if someone is sending you a text or a message or an email, or in person, you can say, that's I want to respect the family during this time. I have nothing else to add, or I don't know. And announcements sometimes come out on Facebook now. Have them be looking for that, or because you shouldn't feel like you have to be the one to notify everyone about arrangements or anything like that. You can simply say, I don't know, the family is taking care of that. And again, we don't have to take care of them by helping them find the information that they need. You simply need to say whatever version of that resonates with you and feels comfortable for you. I don't know, the family is taking care of that, and silence.
Yeah. And sometimes that's the best response that you can give. Just honestly say, that's all the information I have. I just wanted to share it. And if you know of anyone who might want to also know,
you can share that with them.
You can share that with them. Yeah. So we talked about setting the stage and how to present yourself. The other thing that is important is to listen for feedback and let them know that you hear what they're trying to tell you. Because people in grief want to know that they're heard and that they're understood.
And that their loved one isn't forgotten.
Exactly. And that's the whole idea about mentioning their name and lifting up their name into the conversation. It makes breaking the ice a lot easier to.
And you can apply all of these skills and techniques that we talked about to any difficult conversation that you're being called to have with a loved one. A few years ago on Thanksgiving, our son Peter said So do you guys have a will? And that was pretty courageous of him, because we didn't. And that opened up the door for us to have the conversation with him, have the conversation with it,
Between
with each
ourselves.
other, and come to a point where now we have not only a will, but we have a trust. So that will keep everything from that will make things much easier for him when we die. So sometimes it's just asking that simple question.
Right.
So we hope that these techniques and suggestions have been helpful to you. We would love to hear your questions about situations that you find yourself in and you don't quite know what to say or how to start a conversation.
Yeah, and by taking the time to check in and share your concern, you're letting the grieved party know that they're not alone. And that's so important,
Right.
because that is also one of the things that people tend to do is isolate themselves and want to grieve privately. We've talked about that in the myths of grief section before, and to let them know that they don't have to, face the situation by themselves.
Right.
So,
Right. And that we all grieve in our own way, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. And by giving them that permission, we are making the space for them to move through it in their own way.
exactly. So, with that, the idea of these conversations is to get this message out to as many people as possible. People have asked us how can they introduce someone to us, and there's several different ways.
Yeah, and the timing sometimes is important, because I've had people introduce me to someone who has loved one has died immediately, and it's not the right time. It's for me, it may have been the right time because I was ready to delve in earlier. For you, it wouldn't have
It
been the
wasn't.
right time.
Right.
And so the timing can sometimes be tricky. One thing that I like to suggest is to give them our website, which is beingwithgrief.com. We have a lot of stuff on our website. We have examples of how we work with our clients. We have blogs that talk about our story, that talk about meeting different aspects of grief. You can invite them to become a part of this webinar, and you'll find information on how to do that in the comments section of wherever you're listening to this particular webinar. And when you do that, you get access to all the webinars. This is our 7th one now, I think, 6th or 7th, and you have access to all of them for as long as you are a part of the membership container community, right? And the other thing is, a lot of people that I know have purchased my book and sent that to people. Again, timing can be tricky because I received books right after Leah died that I didn't read right away. So knowing that and giving it to them and saying, this may not be the right time, however, this book helped me, and when it is the right time, I encourage you to read it. We also, if you know someone is ready, you can connect us in an email with an introduction, and then we can have a conversation with them, either one of us or both of us. We each do individual work. As you know, Dan is a grief recovery method specialist, and me with my individual intuitive work. So there are a lot of ways to get in touch with us. We're on Facebook as Being with Grief, Instagram as Being with Grief. So leaving us a comment and saying, I know someone that I would like you to meet, how can I do that? Reach out to us. We are accessible we are available, and it's our passion to help people know that they don't have to stay stuck in a place that doesn't serve them.
And it all starts with a conversation. That's why we named this changing the conversation around grief.
Right.
It's been a stigmatized subject that makes people uncomfortable. There's no reason for us to hide it when it's something that everyone will be faced with grief at some point in their lives.
Right.
Having the tools and skills that we talk about and share can help you on that path, and that's what we'd like to do.
Yes, so we look forward to hearing from you, hearing your questions about this topic or any other topic that you would like to hear. Our next month's topic is navigating grief during the holidays, and we wanted to have it a little bit before the holidays started to give you the tools and resources to make that what could be a very difficult time a little more easeful. So it'll be the second, these webinars are always the second Tuesday of the month at 11 a.m. Central Time. You'll find information about that, how to access that live Zoom call, again, in the comments of wherever you're reading this.
Thanks, and we'll see you next month.